A basketball legend bought a 68-room Tudor mansion in Detroit so massive it could swallow most celebrity estates entirely. Gordy ran a whole music empire from behind the doors of a Boston Boulevard fortress. And right now, a Hollywood actor owns one of Detroit's most iconic industrialist palaces, and he's not selling. These are only a few Black-owned mansions in Detroit we're going to talk about in this jaw-dropping countdown. Stick around, because the mansion at number 1 will blow your mind. Number 6. Hill Harper's Charles T. Fisher Mansion. Let's kick off with a mansion that separates this entire list from every other celebrity real estate roundup you've ever seen. Hill Harper bought a mansion that's basically a time capsule from when Detroit money was different. We're talking Fisher body money, as in the company that helped turn General Motors into the beast it became. One of the Fisher brothers built this place in Boston Edison, and it's the kind of house where you walk in and immediately feel underdressed. But Hill didn't just buy a pretty house, the man made a statement. Because this thing is massive, 16,000 to 18,000 square feet, 14 bedrooms, 14 bathrooms, but the square footage doesn't even begin to tell the story. Walk in and you're greeted by an English walnut stairway that's basically a work of art. The kind of craftsmanship where you stop mid-step just to stare at the grain patterns. There are elaborate plaster moldings throughout, the kind of detail work that took actual artisans months to complete, not a contractor with a nail gun. 6 fireplaces, 4 vaults, a private chapel, and here's where it gets fun. A fully intact 1920s Prohibition-era speakeasy, because of course the Fisher brothers had one. This was peak Prohibition Detroit, and wealthy industrialists weren't about to let a little thing like federal law stop them from entertaining. Oh, and there's a mahogany organ with 840 pipes, just casually sitting there like it's normal to have a concert-grade instrument built into your house. The interior features rare flint faience tiles, these ornate, colorful art tiles that were produced locally and are now almost impossible to find. Outside, the entrance is guarded by stone lions, because subtle wasn't really the vibe in 1920s industrial Detroit. But here's what makes Hill's ownership even more special. He didn't just buy this architectural masterpiece and live in it quietly. He's been actively restoring it, 44 rooms worth of updates, working with designers to blend old-world architecture with modern sensibility. The original iron, glass, and bronze front door? Preserved. The speakeasy? Restored. He's keeping the soul of the place intact while making it livable for 2025. And then there's the community piece. Hill's made it clear this house isn't just his private castle. He hosts events, opens it up for public engagement, treats it like a living piece of Detroit history that people should actually experience. It's not locked behind gates. It's part of the neighborhood's cultural fabric. Most celebrity houses are just assets. This one's a mission, and that's the difference. Now buckle up, because the mansion we're heading to next has great historical significance. Number 5. Marvin Gaye's former Outer Drive home. Located at 3067 West Outer Drive in the Bagley community, this one doesn't look like much from the outside, honestly, just another solid Detroit home on a quiet street. But it's a mansion where Marvin Gaye lived during the early 70s and created one of the greatest soul albums ever recorded. Gordy bought this house and straight up gifted it to his sister Anna and her husband Marvin in 1967, which is either incredibly generous or a very convenient way to keep your star artist close to home base. Probably both. They lived there until 1972, right through the peak of Marvin's creative evolution from Motown hitmaker to socially conscious musical genius. Here's what makes this house legendary. The hit album, What's Going On, wasn't just recorded elsewhere, it was conceived here. The album that asked America to look at itself, that talked about war and poverty and environmental destruction when most pop music was still stuck on "Baby, I Love You," that vision was born inside these walls. Marvin was living here when he decided to stop playing it safe, when he pushed back against Gordy's commercial instincts and made the album he needed to make. The house itself has changed hands since then. Someone bought it in 2007, used it as a home for their father, gave it a whole new chapter. But in 2021, Detroit officially recognized what happened here by naming a nearby street after Marvin, which is the kind of honor that doesn't happen unless your impact was genuinely transformative. What's wild is how normal this house looks compared to the other estates on this list. No 68 rooms, no grand Italianate architecture, No ballrooms or formal entertaining spaces. Just a comfortable brick home where a man sat down and wrote songs that would outlive everyone who ever tried to tell him what his music should sound like. There's something almost poetic about that contrast. Berry Gordy ran his empire from a Boston Boulevard mansion designed to impress executives and close deals. Marvin Gaye changed music forever from a regular house on Outer Drive where he could actually think. And honestly, that might be the most Detroit thing possible. The city's greatest artistic achievements didn't come from palaces. They came from regular neighborhoods where people had the space and freedom to create something real. Hitsville, USA was a converted house. The home where What's Going On was born looked like your aunt's place. But what came out of these spaces? Absolutely revolutionary. Music that's still being studied, sampled, and celebrated over 50 years later. Songs that became the soundtrack to social movements, that gave voice to things people were feeling but couldn't articulate. This house on Outer Drive is not trying to compete with Tudor Revival mega estates or industrialist fortresses. It's just quietly sitting there, holding on to this secret history that most people driving past would never guess. And maybe that's exactly how Marvin would have wanted it. Unassuming on the outside, transformative on the inside. Number 4. The Manoogian Mansion. Okay, let's talk about the house that every Detroit mayor gets to live in, because it's absolutely ridiculous, and most people have no idea it even exists. The Manoogian Mansion sits on the Detroit River in the Barry subdivision, which sounds fancy because it absolutely is. People literally call this area the Gold Coast, and they're not being ironic. This isn't just a nice house. This is a full-blown estate that was gifted to the city in 1966 by Alex Manoogian, the Masco Corporation founder who apparently decided the best way to spend his philanthropy budget was giving Detroit's mayor a waterfront palace. And right now, that palace belongs to Mayor Mary Sheffield, who happens to be black, which makes this mansion directly relevant to our list and also kind of perfect symbolically. Because this building represents civic power in its most literal physical form. It's not inherited wealth or entertainment money or athletic contracts. It's the official residence of whoever's running the city. The architecture here is genuinely stunning in this very specific mid-century way. The whole design philosophy is about blending indoor and outdoor spaces, which sounds simple until you see how it's actually executed. There's a covered walkway connecting different sections of the house, a central courtyard with an actual pond in the middle, massive windows everywhere letting in natural light, skylights that make the whole place feel open even when you're technically inside. It's the kind of design that architects get excited about and regular people just experience as, wow, this feels expensive. The location alone is worth millions. Detroit riverfront, surrounded by other massive historic homes, views that most Detroiters never get to experience because this neighborhood is so exclusive. And yet it's technically public property, maintained by a nonprofit called the Mayor's Resident Society that handles repairs and improvements, often without touching taxpayer money, which is a pretty clever arrangement when you think about it. There was this wild moment in 2002 when the city basically said, "This formal Chippendale furniture is ridiculous for a family with kids," and held a massive auction to replace everything with stuff that was actually livable, which is kind of hilarious. Imagine being the mayor and having to navigate your daily life around 18th century antiques because nobody bothered to update the place since it was donated. But here's what makes the Manoogian Mansion fascinating beyond just being a beautiful building. It's proof that civic leadership in Detroit comes with actual, tangible perks that put you in the same physical space as old industrial money. Mary Sheffield gets to wake up with riverfront views in a neighborhood that was built by and for Detroit's elite, except now that power has shifted hands. The mansion isn't owned by Sheffield personally. She'll hand it over to whoever wins the next election. But while she's there, she's occupying a space that represents Detroit at its peak, living in a building that was designed to impress, entertaining in rooms that were built for power brokers and decision-makers. And in a city where black political leadership has been fighting for recognition and resources for decades, where every policy decision gets scrutinized and every budget gets questioned, there's something quietly significant about the fact that the official mayoral residence, this gorgeous riverfront estate with its courtyards and its views and its architectural pedigree, belongs to a black woman right now. Number 3. Aretha Franklin's former estate, Hamilton Road. Here's the thing about Aretha's mansion located at 18,261 Hamilton Road. She owned it for 25 years, from 1993 until she passed in 2018. It sold posthumously in 2023 for around $510,000, which sounds wild for the Queen of Soul, right? But that's exactly the point. This was not a showpiece, and it was certainly not designed for magazine spreads or industry parties. It was Aretha's sanctuary, the place she disappeared to while the world kept demanding more. And in an industry where people flip houses like Pokemon cards, where every album cycle means a new zip code, Aretha stayed. 25 years. That kind of residential commitment is almost unheard of at her level of fame. The house was intentionally low-key. No sprawling estate, no gilded gates, nothing screaming, "Celebrity lives here." Just comfortable, private, secure. Aretha valued discretion over spectacle, and this house was the physical embodiment of that. Here's what people forget about Motown-era icons. A lot of them chose Detroit specifically because the city let them be people. Aretha could go to the grocery store without paparazzi ambushing her. She could exist outside the legend. Hamilton Road wasn't just a house. It was a boundary between Aretha Franklin the icon and Aretha the human being. After she passed, the estate sale revealed a lifetime of personal artifacts, the kind of intimate details that only surface when someone's lived somewhere for decades. It wasn't sterile. It wasn't an investment property. It was home. The sale price might seem modest, but this house was never about resale value or impressing anyone. It was about control, stability, a place where Aretha could just be. In a city where so many houses get abandoned or demolished or flipped beyond recognition, Aretha's Hamilton Road estate represents something rare: longevity. Not just in her career, but in her commitment to Detroit as the place she actually lived, long after everyone else moved on. It's not the flashiest house on this list, but it might be the realest. Number 2. Berry Gordy's former Motown mansion. Now, if Aretha's house was about privacy, Berry Gordy's mansion was about power. 918 West Boston Boulevard, right in the heart of the Boston Edison Historic District. This Italianate estate, built in 1917, was Berry Gordy's home from 1967 to 2002, the exact decades when Motown went from a Detroit phenomenon to a global empire. And here's what people get wrong when they talk about Motown. Yes, Hitsville. USA on West Grand Boulevard was where the music got made. That's where the artists recorded, where the Funk Brothers laid down the bass lines, where the magic happened in Studio A. But this house? This was where the decisions got made. Berry Gordy ran Motown like a corporation, not just a record label. And while other music executives were living in New York penthouses or Los Angeles hills, Gordy stayed in Detroit and operated out of this Boston Boulevard mansion. Contract negotiations, artist management, strategic planning for how to break acts nationally, then internationally. This house was the executive brain of the entire operation. The estate itself is pure early 20th century elegance. Italianate architecture, designed for formal entertaining, the kind of place where you could host high-level industry figures without them feeling like they'd stepped into someone's personal space. It was professional, stately, and built to project exactly the kind of authority Gordy needed to command respect in an industry that didn't want to take black-owned businesses seriously. And make no mistake, Motown was a business. Berry Gordy wasn't just discovering talent and hoping for the best. He built an assembly line for hits, a system that could churn out chart toppers with the same efficiency that Detroit's auto plants churned out cars. And he did it all while owning the masters, controlling the rights, and keeping the profits in-house. This mansion was a symbol of that ownership. At a time when most black artists were getting exploited by white-owned labels, when the industry standard was to pay pennies and keep control, Gordy flipped the script. He owned the label. He owned the publishing. He owned the mansion on Boston Boulevard that signaled he wasn't just a player in the music business, he was the business. The house hosted everyone: artists, executives, investors, politicians. It was a nerve center, a meeting place, a statement. And the fact that it's located in Boston Edison, one of Detroit's most prestigious historic neighborhoods, wasn't an accident. Gordy wasn't hiding. He was planting a flag in one of the city's most exclusive areas and daring anyone to question whether he belonged there. He sold the mansion in 2002, long after Motown's golden era had passed, long after the label itself had been sold, and moved to Los Angeles. But the house remains one of the most culturally consequential residences in Detroit history. Because this wasn't just where Berry Gordy lived, it's where he built an empire that changed American music forever. And every contract signed, every artist developed, every strategic move that turned Motown into a global brand. A lot of that happened behind the doors of 918 West, Boston Boulevard. But as massive as Berry Gordy's influence was, it doesn't quite compare to the sheer physical scale of what's coming next. We're talking about a house so absurdly large that calling it a mansion almost feels inadequate. Number 1. John Salley's former Bishop Gallagher Mansion. 68 rooms. Let that number sit for a second. Not 6, not 8, 68. John Salley, former NBA champion and Detroit Pistons legend, bought what is arguably the largest private residence in Detroit and possibly the entire Midwest back in 1989. The address has been listed as both 19,366 Lucerne Drive and 1880 Wellesley Drive, nestled in Palmer Woods, one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. This wasn't just a big house. This was a Tudor Revival mega estate that functioned more like a compound than a residence. Multiple wings, ballrooms, plural. Formal halls that could host events most people would rent a venue for. The scale of this place is legitimately insane. To put it in perspective, most luxury mansions top out around 10 to 15 rooms. A truly extravagant celebrity estate might push 20 or 25. John Salley's house had 68. That's not a home. That's a small hotel. And at the time he bought it, this was almost certainly the largest private residence ever owned by a black professional athlete in Detroit, and probably one of the biggest in the country. This was 1989, remember? The era when athlete wealth was starting to explode. But we weren't yet in the age of $100 million contracts and equity stakes in tech companies. Salley was making good money, sure, but buying a 68-room mansion was a statement. The estate itself had the kind of architectural grandeur that most people only see in movies. Tudor Revival design, which means steeply pitched roofs, decorative half-timbering, and the kind of old-world European aesthetic that screams generational wealth. Except in this case, the wealth was new, earned on basketball courts, and it was reclaiming a space that had historically been reserved for Detroit's industrial elite. Culturally, this purchase was huge. We're talking about the late 80s, right at the tail end of the civil rights generation's battles and the beginning of a new era of black economic power. Athletes like Salley were among the first wave of black professionals who could afford to buy into neighborhoods and properties that had been explicitly or implicitly closed to them for decades. And Salley didn't just buy big, he bought the biggest. He set a precedent that later black athletes and entrepreneurs in Detroit would follow. The message was clear: we're not just participating in wealth, we're dominating it. Even after Salley sold the property, the Bishop Gallagher Mansion remained Detroit's gold standard for residential excess. Other athletes have bought big houses since then, but none have quite matched the sheer absurdity of 68 rooms. It's a benchmark that's held for over 3 decades. The house also represents a very specific moment in Detroit's economic and cultural history. The Pistons were winning championships. The city still had a thriving black middle and upper class. There was optimism about Detroit's future, and figures like Salley embodied that. They weren't fleeing to the coasts. They were investing in Detroit, buying into its most prestigious neighborhoods, and living like kings while doing it. Of course, the question everyone asks is, what do you even do with 68 rooms? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. The point wasn't utility, it was scale. It was the ability to say, I can afford this and I'm going to buy it because I can. John Salley's mansion wasn't about practicality, it was about possibility. And in a city like Detroit, where black wealth has always had to fight for recognition and space, that kind of possibility matters. But here's where things get interesting. Because while Salley's mansion was about athletic dominance translated into square footage, the next estate represents something even rarer. An actor who didn't just buy a historic mansion but bought it with a mission.